What if the real danger on a Hollywood set wasn't the stunts, but the superstitions? From cursed costumes to phantom whispers and ghostly props, these chilling tales from cinema's golden age weren't just rumors. They led to real disasters. Here are 23 golden era superstitions that turned legendary films into terrifying experiences. Dare to watch until the final frame? The unlucky red lipstick. Curse. Rebel without a cause. 1955. It started as an innocent choice. A vibrant red lipstick that Natalie Wood insisted on wearing in Rebel Without a Cause. But whispers on the Warner Brothers lot called it cursed. Legend had it that any young starlet who wore that specific shade, dubbed Cherry Flame No. 23, would meet tragedy. Makeup artists joked about it, but behind closed doors, they begged actresses to switch colors. Natalie, known for her defiance, refused. Then, James Dean died in a horrific car crash just days after filming Wrapped. Sal Mineo was murdered a few years later. And Natalie? She drowned under mysterious circumstances during a boat trip, still young, still luminous. Crew members swore they saw her reapplying that very lipstick in a mirror just hours before she disappeared. Was it coincidence? Or did that lipstick shade carry the weight of something far darker? A wardrobe assistant later confessed she'd heard tales of a silent film star who wore it during a fatal on-set accident in the 1920s. Somehow, the tube had stayed in rotation, passed around unknowingly, carrying a curse through the decades. Studios eventually pulled the shade from their makeup kits, but by then, the damage had been done. The tragedy wasn't just in the deaths, but in the chilling truth that a simple cosmetic choice could carry so much doom. Hollywood knew better than to scoff at its own ghosts. The whistling on set. Taboo. The Seahawk. 1940. It's an old theatrical superstition. Never whistle backstage or on set. And in the case of the Seahawk, that superstition turned deadly. During the filming of this swashbuckling epic starring Errol Flynn, a young stagehand, eager and oblivious, began whistling between takes. The crew fell silent. Several veterans turned pale. Director Michael Curtis reportedly shouted, "Stop that now! You'll kill someone!" That same afternoon, a lighting rig inexplicably collapsed on the soundstage. One crew member died instantly. Another was severely injured. The set was shut down for 2 days. Studio heads blamed technical faults, but the crew knew better. The whistle had summoned something. After all, according to seafaring lore, which the film drew heavily from, whistling invited the wind and death. Errol Flynn, shaken but stoic, later refused to step foot on that specific soundstage again. The production was quietly relocated. The whistling rule became unspoken law. Decades later, a former Warner Brothers grip revealed that before every seafaring film thereafter, a priest would discreetly bless the stage. No one whistled again. The number 13 curse. The Tower of London. 1939. Universal's Gothic horror. The Tower of London was a film already drenched in doom and blood. But the decision to shoot its climactic execution scene on the 13th day of filming, on stage 13 no less, was a fateful choice. Director Roland V. Lee laughed off the warnings, calling superstition a coward's excuse. Vincent Price, the film's star, had his doubts, but went along with it. That day, everything went wrong. A fire broke out in the costume trailer, destroying dozens of intricate period outfits. Then, a gallows prop collapsed mid-scene, injuring a stuntman who was nearly hanged for real. Even creepier, camera footage captured an unexplained shadow figure moving through the fog, which no one remembered seeing during the shoot. Price later confessed to friends that he felt haunted for months after, plagued by nightmares and a sudden fear of heights. Crew members began wearing crucifixes on set, and several quit mid-production. The number 13 wasn't just unlucky, it felt like a magnet for tragedy. From then on, Universal skipped using stage 13 altogether. The incident became so infamous that other studios followed suit, renumbering stages to avoid the curse. But the Tower of London remained etched in Hollywood history, not for its box office, but for the superstitious storm it unleashed. The Haunted Mirror of Queen Christina, 1933. On the set of Queen Christina, Greta Garbo requested a grand, ornate mirror as a key prop, one sourced from a European estate, rumored to have belonged to Marie Antoinette. The mirror, towering and gold-leafed, arrived swaddled in velvet, along with whispered warnings. Never stare too long into it. Garbo was fascinated. She believed mirrors could capture souls, and this one, she said, held centuries of grief. Crew members began to report unease, reflections that didn't match reality. A grip said he saw a second Garbo behind her in the mirror, only she wasn't blinking. During a rehearsal, the mirror suddenly shattered, seemingly from within. No one had touched it. The explosion injured 2 assistants and nearly blinded Garbo's hairstylist. Production halted for 3 days. The mirror was swept away and buried in studio storage, never seen again. Garbo later refused to look into any mirror on set. She claimed that what she saw in that one stayed with her, something pale, feminine, and mourning. The film remains iconic, but few know that one of its props carried such terror. In later years, a historian uncovered a photograph of the mirror from an old French chateau. Its prior owner had committed suicide before it was sold. Hollywood still whispers, "Never bring a dead queen's mirror into a living queen's set." The Real Skeleton Curse. House of Wax, 1953. In a bid for realism, director André de Toth used real human skeletons as props in House of Wax. "Plastic looked too fake," he said. But what he didn't realize, or chose to ignore, was the cultural taboo around using unblessed remains, especially in horror films. The studio had sourced them cheaply from overseas medical suppliers, but nobody asked how those bones were acquired. Soon after filming began, crew members began falling ill. Fevers, hallucinations, even seizures. Vincent Price complained of insomnia and hearing whispers on set. One makeup artist fainted in the middle of applying wax to a dummy, claiming the skull's eye sockets moved. A priest was called to bless the set. The skeletons were quietly removed, but the damage was done. Post-production was plagued by delays, and the studio suffered a minor fire days before the premiere. Critics praised the film's eeriness, but insiders whispered it came at a cost. Some said the skeletons wanted acknowledgement, not exploitation. Years later, one of the skeletons was traced to a missing person from Eastern Europe. That revelation haunted the cast for years, with Price reportedly refusing any future horror role that used real human remains. The moral? In Hollywood, even bones have stories and curses. The Purple Wardrobe Hex. The Women, 1939. At the heart of The Women, an all-female ensemble cast created waves in 1939. But beneath the glamour of this groundbreaking film was a superstition few dared mention: the curse of purple wardrobe. According to MGM costumers, purple symbolized mourning and betrayal, especially when worn during romantic storylines. Still, designer Adrian insisted on a regal purple evening gown for Joan Crawford's infamous catfight scene. From that moment, misfortune followed. Crawford reportedly clashed violently with co-star Norma Shearer, not just in character, but off-set. Arguments, tears, even rumored sabotage with makeup. A seamstress slipped and shattered her wrist sewing a purple sequin hem. A camera assistant was hospitalized after being struck by a collapsing rig just before the purple scene was filmed. By the final week, the costume department begged to swap the dress, but Crawford refused. She loved how it made her look. When the film wrapped, Shearer took an extended leave from acting. Crawford's reputation suffered a blow as stories of her behavior leaked. One supporting actress reportedly developed a rash anytime she wore violet shades for years after. Even decades later, purple gowns became taboo in romantic Hollywood films. Costumers whispered it was the color of cursed women. In an industry built on symbols and shadows, sometimes fabric holds the heaviest weight. The Black Cat Visitor. The Black Cat, 1934. During production of The Black Cat, a horror classic starring Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi, something stranger than fiction began occurring. A real black cat, uninvited and untamed, began appearing on set daily. No one knew where it came from, but it always arrived before scenes with death or despair. Actors joked it was method acting for the cat, but others weren't laughing. An electrician tripped over the feline's path and fractured his collarbone. A rigging pulley failed just moments after the cat perched nearby. The animal vanished for 2 days, during which filming went smoothly, until it returned, hissing at Karloff during a pivotal scene. That same night, a fire broke out in the studio lot. Crew members began feeding the cat in hopes of appeasing it. Lugosi, steeped in Eastern European folklore, reportedly carried a silver charm in his coat. One assistant director claimed the cat locked eyes with him before he fainted on set. Universal brought in a local animal control unit to remove the feline, but no one ever caught it. Some believed it was a spirit, not a stray. Others said it had been conjured by the film's eerie subject matter. Regardless, the cast began reciting protection charms before filming. Years later, Karloff admitted he never watched the film again. Too many deaths followed it, he said. The rehearsing death curse. Camille, 1936. In Camille, Greta Garbo delivered one of the most heart-wrenching death scenes in Hollywood history. But behind the camera, her preparation for that final moment, rehearsed endlessly in a grave-like alcove on the soundstage, became its own haunting story. Garbo insisted on rehearsing the death scene in full costume daily for 2 weeks, lying in the same position, eyes fixed on the ceiling. She even requested a prop death mask be made, based on her face, to see how she looked in death. The crew grew uncomfortable. The more she rehearsed, the more somber the set became. One lighting operator quit after claiming he saw a mist leave her body during a practice run. Soon after, a beloved assistant director collapsed and died of a sudden aneurysm, on the very spot Garbo had been lying. Production paused. The alcove was demolished. Word spread that rehearsing death too often invited it. Garbo herself became withdrawn for months. She refused to discuss the death mask, which was rumored to have been buried on studio grounds. Other actresses avoided practicing death scenes from then on. Garbo never again played a dying woman. And a quiet rule was passed among Golden Age directors: never let death become routine. The Clock Strikes Twice. Omen, Meet Me in St. Louis, 1944. In Meet Me in St. Louis, Judy Garland enchanted audiences, but one detail on set chilled the crew to the bone. A grand antique clock, used in the family's parlor, was sourced from a real Missouri estate and set to chime hourly. But something odd occurred. It began chiming twice at the stroke of midnight, even when unplugged. Set decorators swore they'd checked the mechanics. No explanation. Director Vincente Minnelli grew uneasy when a grip working the night shift died in a freak scaffolding collapse, right after midnight. Garland, reportedly superstitious, began avoiding scenes near the clock. In one instance, the clock chimed at 11:55, throwing the entire crew into panic. Shooting stopped. Studio execs insisted the clock be removed, but Minnelli refused. "It's real," he said. And this film is about memory. Ironically, that clock remains preserved in the MGM archives, but is never displayed at midnight events. Historians believe it came from a house where 2 tragic murders occurred in 1901, both at the stroke of 12. To this day, sound engineers recount stories of the audio reel capturing the clock's double chime, even when all background noise was cut. Garland never spoke of it, but she never stood near that set piece again. The Mirror in the Dressing Room. Curse. Sunset Boulevard. 1950. Gloria Swanson's performance as Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard became legendary. But many don't know the real terror that occurred in her dressing room. The room featured a vintage mirror, Art Deco style, that once belonged to silent film star Barbara Lamar, who died young and mysteriously. The mirror was kept as a tribute by Paramount's props department. On her first day, Swanson joked, "Let's see if it shows me the past or the future." But as filming progressed, Swanson grew disturbed. She claimed the mirror showed her someone else when she looked in during long nights. Another woman, eyes wide, mouth open, as if screaming. Makeup artists noticed the temperature dropped when she was alone in the room. One PA swore he saw a woman in 1920s attire, staring back at him while passing by. Swanson demanded the mirror be covered with a black veil during her scenes. After production wrapped, the mirror was shattered in storage by accident. The warehouse worker who broke it lost 3 fingers in the incident. Sunset Boulevard was about the haunting of fame, but for Swanson, it became a literal haunting. Some say Barbara Lamar wasn't ready to fade from the reflection. The Crying Baby on Set Omen, A Place in the Sun, 1951. During the emotionally intense filming of A Place in the Sun, an unshakable chill settled over one particular scene, Montgomery Clift's character facing moral crisis. Just as the cameras rolled, a baby's distant cry echoed across the Paramount lot. Only problem? There were no babies anywhere on set. At first, the crew dismissed it as a sound from nearby traffic or a radio. But it kept happening. Same time, same volume. Only during emotionally charged scenes. Elizabeth Taylor reportedly turned pale during one take and whispered, "Someone doesn't want us telling this story." Things escalated when a boom operator suffered a heart attack on set. Another crew member fractured his leg when a sandbag fell from the rafters. Again, just after the phantom cry. Clift himself began breaking down emotionally between scenes, describing an unbearable guilt that felt beyond the role. Eventually, a spiritual advisor was brought in, who claimed the film had stirred unresolved energies. A local lore expert traced the lot's location to an orphanage site that had burned down in the 1910s. Records confirmed an infant had died tragically on the grounds. After a small ceremony, the cries ceased, but not before production was nearly halted. The final film was a triumph, but insiders whispered it came with a toll. Ever since, a crying baby on a closed set is seen as an omen, and production pauses until silence is restored. The Injured Bird Curse, The Maltese Falcon, 1941. The Maltese Falcon had its own hidden superstition, embedded right in the script: the titular bird. The statue used in the film was cast in heavy lead and polished to a jet black finish. But legend had it that the moment the bird was dropped or mishandled, misfortune would strike. And it did. During rehearsals, a stagehand accidentally dropped the falcon prop, cracking one of its talons. That same evening, the actor playing Detective Tom Polhouse was injured in a car crash and hospitalized. Weeks later, another mishap occurred. The falcon was set atop a prop table that collapsed mid-scene, slamming into Humphrey Bogart's foot. He limped through the remaining shoot, refusing to retake scenes. Some in the crew believed the bird was cursed, not just as a plot device, but as a physical object. After all, the real Maltese falcon from lore was said to bring war and betrayal wherever it went. A historian on set jokingly warned, "That bird's bad luck, even in legend." By the film's wrap, a third actor, Elisha Cook Jr., had fractured a rib after tripping over the falcon's storage crate. Director John Huston insisted it was all coincidence, but he had the original statue locked in a vault and used a resin copy for final takes. The original falcon has since become a prized collectible, but the warning still floats around Hollywood: never drop the bird, or it may drop you. The Camera That Refused to Film. Notorious, 1946. Alfred Hitchcock believed in timing, shadows, and silence. But on Notorious, Even he encountered a force he couldn't control. The infamous wine cellar kiss scene between Ingrid Bergman and Cary Grant was supposed to be shot in one take. But something strange kept happening. The camera would jam, then lose focus, then mysteriously overexpose, even under perfect lighting. It happened 5 times. A technician joked, "This camera doesn't want them together." The crew began calling it the camera that refused the kiss. When a replacement camera was used, it jammed too, only during the exact moment their lips met. Eventually, Hitchcock moved the scene outdoors and shot it in moonlight. The shot worked flawlessly. Word spread that the soundstage had once been used for a wedding scene in a now-lost silent film, where the starlet had taken her life before the film's release. Bergman reportedly felt a woman's presence in the room every time they rehearsed. Some said the ghostly energy disapproved of the affair portrayed between Grant and Bergman. Others believed Hitchcock had stirred something with his obsessive perfectionism. To this day, some cameras used in that scene are preserved, but none are operational. Technicians say they died with the kiss. The wounded director prop, Ben-Hur, 1959. Though Ben-Hur is most remembered for its epic chariot race, few know about the cursed prop that plagued director William Wyler throughout production. A Roman spear, made of metal and aged with real rust. It was meant only for background soldiers, but Wyler insisted on its authenticity for wide shots. One day, Wyler tripped on the massive set and was impaled by the very spear, suffering a deep leg wound. The spear pierced his calf muscle, and he was hospitalized for a week. His absence caused delays and rewrites. Some believed the accident was punishment for pushing actors through grueling, dangerous scenes. After his return, another spear-related injury occurred. A stuntman narrowly missed being impaled in a crash. Then, an extra collapsed from tetanus. The spear had broken the skin during a stage skirmish. Production halted. The props were sanitized, but the story of the wounded director's spear became a parable in studio safety meetings for years. Wyler completed the film, but later admitted he felt cursed by the weapon. He had the spear melted down, but fragments were kept by crew members as mementos, some of whom later reported injuries while on unrelated sets. In Hollywood, even a weapon meant to be fake can strike back. The Ghost in the Projection Room. Casablanca, 1942. When Casablanca was in post-production, studio executives rushed to screen the dailies nightly. But something, or someone, was always in the projection room first. Editors would arrive to find the reels rolling, or the light flickering, with no operator in sight. The janitor was the first to say it aloud. "There's a man in there every night. He doesn't speak." Technicians described seeing a figure standing by the projector, dressed in 1930s attire, quietly watching the screen. Security sweeps turned up no one, yet film would often be found scratched or spliced, where no edits had been made. One night, an assistant editor stayed behind to catch the mystery. He claimed the figure turned to him and whispered, "Let them end it differently." The next morning, that reel had been cut, removing a pivotal romantic scene between Bogart and Bergman. The scene was never reshot. The ending stayed as it was. Years later, records showed the projection room had once belonged to a silent film director who'd lost his job after being overruled on a film's final cut. He died by suicide inside that very room. To this day, some say he still watches over endings, not to ruin them, but to preserve the truth. The banned Bible verse. Samson and Delilah, 1949. Cecil B. DeMille was a stickler for dramatics and authenticity. But on the set of Samson and Delilah, he ignored an old Hollywood superstition. Never quote certain verses from the Book of Judges on a biblical film set, especially those involving death and betrayal. The specific passage, Judges 16:30, was considered cursed due to its invocation of destruction. "Let me die with the Philistines." DeMille insisted the verse be inscribed onto a massive stone tablet prop, for added realism. On the day it was wheeled onto the set, disaster followed. A lighting rig collapsed during a rehearsal, injuring 3. One crew member lost partial vision. The next day, lead actor Victor Mature fell ill with a high fever, and filming halted. That night, a fire broke out in the storage lot where the tablet prop had been kept. Though no one was harmed, most of the film's intricate costumes and props were destroyed. The scene was rewritten, the prop destroyed. And a studio-wide memo quietly went out, banning use of any direct verses invoking mass death from Old Testament epics. Religious advisors later suggested that ancient texts carry spiritual weights, not meant to be manipulated for entertainment. Even decades later, no Hollywood biblical production dares to dramatize that line again. It's said that invoking destruction in sacred words may summon something that listens. The photograph that fades faces. Now, Voyager, 1942. On the set of Now, Voyager, starring Bette Davis, a simple prop, a family photo used to symbolize the protagonist's troubled past, began to exhibit eerie qualities. Photographers on set noticed that every time the photograph was snapped for promotional materials, one or more faces in the image would blur, specifically Bette Davis's. Technicians blamed it on overexposure or lens issues. But the photo was printed clean on film stock, until the next day, when the face would inexplicably fade or darken. This occurred 5 times. Publicity staff began calling it the fading face curse. Then a studio photographer collapsed from a stroke mid-session. Another had their darkroom vandalized by an unknown intruder. Yet nothing was stolen. Only the negatives of the Davis shots were destroyed. A terrified assistant finally traced the photo's origin. It had been borrowed from a real Boston family who had endured a tragic murder-suicide years earlier. That very photo had belonged to the deceased. Davis, a rationalist by nature, dismissed it. But she refused to pose with the image again. The prop was quietly burned. The replacement photograph used in the final cut was a studio composite. Still, for years, Hollywood makeup departments warned newcomers. If a photo can erase a face, it's not acting. It's something else. The Cough Heard Before Chaos. Gone with the Wind, 1939. While filming the famously intense Atlanta fire scene in Gone with the Wind, a strange pattern emerged. Just before each take, a hacking cough could be heard echoing through the backlot. Crews would stop, search, and find nothing. It wasn't coming from an actor, nor any studio speaker. Still, every time that cough was ignored and filming resumed, something went wrong. First, a pyrotechnic charge exploded prematurely, singeing an extra. Then, a stuntman broke his leg falling from a runaway cart. And in the most terrifying incident, a makeup trailer caught fire from a freak spark. No one was hurt, but the film stock inside was ruined. Clark Gable reportedly said the sound reminded him of a tuberculosis patient. Crew rumors connected the backlot to an old infirmary torn down in the 1920s, where dozens had died coughing themselves to death. After that, the rule was set. Stop if you hear the cough. A small séance was held by Vivian Lee's spiritualist friend. Afterward, the cough stopped, and the remainder of the fiery shoot went smoothly. Still, Gable made sure his dressing room was far from the lot. Years later, audio engineers swear they can still hear that cough in raw reels, low, gurgling, and always before something breaks. The Ballet Shoe Curse. The Red Shoes, 1948. In The Red Shoes, the ballet sequences were so beautifully choreographed that audiences forgot the film was plagued by a sinister wardrobe superstition. Moira Shearer, the film's radiant lead, wore custom red satin ballet slippers that, according to production gossip, had a history tied to real on-stage deaths. The shoes were rumored to have once belonged to a dancer who collapsed mid-performance in Paris. They were later auctioned and ended up in London, where Powell and Pressburger's team rented them for the shoot to achieve perfect realism. From the moment Shearer slipped them on, oddities plagued the set. One stagehand broke a finger while loading props. A dancer tore her Achilles tendon mid-pirouette. Worst of all, a scaffolding support gave way during rehearsal, nearly killing the cinematographer. Shearer reportedly developed sleep paralysis and nightmares about bleeding feet. The crew demanded a replacement pair, but the directors were adamant about preserving the original ones for continuity. Eventually, Shearer began hiding the shoes between scenes. She claimed they moved on their own, never where she left them. When filming ended, the shoes were donated to a museum, where alarms were triggered repeatedly at night, always near their display case. To this day, dancers avoid borrowing vintage ballet slippers. Some believe old shoes carry not just history, but the unfulfilled dreams of dancers who never got their final bow. The Stage 4 Sudden Wind. Wuthering Heights, 1939. The haunting romance of Wuthering Heights was intensified by outdoor scenes shot on Stage 4 at United Artists. But cast and crew began to fear the stage after a strange natural phenomenon. Sudden, violent gusts of wind would sweep through the enclosed space, with no source or warning. They called it the Heights Breath. Laurence Olivier nearly lost an eye when a sand prop flung into his face during one such gust. Merle Oberon was knocked into a prop gravestone and suffered a concussion. The studio brought in engineers to examine ventilation and air ducts. Nothing was found. The winds were not only real, but dangerously targeted. They only occurred during the most emotional scenes: deaths, confessions, confrontations. A weather expert hired privately by the producer concluded that the pressure shifts were too localized to be natural. A visiting mystic told the crew that the story had awakened a storm spirit, drawn to the pain reenacted on stage. After filming, the winds never returned. Stage 4 became quiet. Yet years later, when a new adaptation of Wuthering Heights was planned on that same stage, the wind returned, on the same dates of filming. The project was abruptly moved outdoors. Stage 4 earned a new name among insiders: The Weeping Moor. The Cursed Funeral Veil. Dark Victory, 1939. Dark Victory was already soaked in sadness. Bette Davis played a terminally ill socialite facing her final days. But during costume fittings, a particularly morbid item caught everyone's attention: the black funeral veil Davis was to wear in the climactic scene. It wasn't made by the wardrobe department. It was a genuine Victorian mourning veil, sourced from an estate sale. Almost immediately, odd occurrences surrounded the veil. A costumer fainted while ironing it. Another developed a sudden case of shingles after handling it. Even Davis grew unsettled, claiming it smelled like the earth, and asking if it had been buried. During filming of the deathbed scene, a studio light blew out and showered the room in sparks. Davis was unharmed, but shaken. The veil? Not a single singe mark. Historians later traced the veil's origin to a Boston widow who died in that same garment after wearing it daily for a year. When that truth surfaced, Davis refused to wear it again. A replica was made, but the original was never found after being sent to storage. Some say the veil wasn't just mourning its past. It resented being reused for fiction. Since then, studio policy has forbidden real funeral garments in costume inventories. The Locked Door Soundstage. Gaslight, 1944. For a psychological thriller like Gaslight, atmosphere was everything. But the set itself became the greatest mystery. The house where Ingrid Bergman's character slowly descends into madness was built on Soundstage 12 at MGM, a location long considered bad luck due to its impossible-to-explain issue. The door to the main set would lock itself from the inside. Time and again, the crew would return from breaks to find themselves locked out. No one inside, no tampering. Keys wouldn't work. One grip was trapped for 2 hours alone inside, and later refused to speak about what he experienced, only muttering, "It doesn't want to be filmed." Bergman herself broke character during one scene and ran off set, claiming she felt watched by something not in the script. The lock-ins became so frequent that an emergency axe was placed on site to break in during panic moments. Eventually, they began taping the door open, until one night, a gust slammed it shut anyway. Rumors persisted that the stage was once the location of a failed horror film where a young actress died in a fire. Her spirit, they said, didn't want another woman acting out madness in her space. Today, Soundstage 12 still exists. The locking door has never been explained. But no psychological dramas have been filmed there since. The Silver Screen Shatter. My Reputation, 1946. Barbara Stanwyck was no stranger to drama, but while filming My Reputation, something happened that even she couldn't explain. The final scene required a silver backdrop, designed to reflect light and give the illusion of a dreamy, hopeful future. It had been used in 2 previous productions, both of which had met with tragic fates. One where the lead actor died before release, another where the director disappeared before editing. Still, the studio insisted on recycling. When Stanwyck stepped onto the set, she paused in front of the massive silver screen. Crew members said she looked paralyzed. During the take, the silver sheet buckled inward and then shattered, like glass, even though it was fabric and foil. Shards of reflective material flew everywhere, injuring a cameraman and a boom operator. Production halted. Stanwyck insisted she wouldn't return to that set unless the screen was burned. It was, at midnight, under a full moon, as per her request. Old-timers later said that anything reflecting too much illusion steals reality from the actors who dare to believe in it. The silver screen was never used again. It wasn't just a prop. It was a reminder that even light, when warped too far, can turn deadly. In the golden glow of classic Hollywood, superstition wasn't just old wives' tales. It was survival. These stories remind us that film sets aren't just stages, but spiritual battlegrounds of dreams, fears, and the unseen. So next time the lights flicker, remember, some superstitions were born from something very real.